Can one red envelope topple a dynasty in seconds? A single folder, a fearless voice, a secret so explosive it could shatter an empire. When Jasmine Crockett stood in a congressional hearing, she wasn't just holding evidence, she was clutching dynamite. What truth was so dangerous it pulled a former president through the doors uninvited? In just 47 seconds, Jasmine Crockett ripped open a blood-red envelope on live television, unleashing a $1.8 million bombshell that cracked Ivanka Trump's charity wide open. Gasps sliced through the room. Donald Trump lurched to his feet, veins pulsing, voice quivering, but Jasmine's gaze never faltered. What secret was so lethal it shook a dynasty to its core? The hearing room didn't feel like Congress. It felt like a courtroom doused in gasoline, one spark from erupting. Overhead lights burned harsh, white-hot, like interrogation lamps in a noir film. Microphones crowded close, catching every heartbeat. Chairs groaned under suffocating tension. Every breath sounded too loud, every eye waited for the trigger to be pulled. At the center sat Jasmine Crockett, unmovable, a crimson folder on her desk, screaming danger. No shuffling papers, no sipping water, just pure stillness. Across from her sat Ivanka Trump, poised like a porcelain figure in creamy designer, silk hands clasped, chin slightly raised. Her face said she'd danced this dance before. Her eyes, though, darted fast, searching for cracks for escape routes. The room wasn't breathing. 3 rows back, reporters leaned forward like wolves eyeing a wounded deer. Cameramen tightened their shots. A faint buzz from the lights hummed like a countdown to chaos. Then the storm broke. The door burst open, no knock, no warning. Donald Trump stormed in a tornado in a Navy suit, eyes blazing like a wildfire at dusk. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone cracked the air like thunder in a quiet chapel. The crowd froze, hearts pounding in their chests. Capitol Police hesitated. Do we stop him? Nobody moved. He wasn't on the witness list, wasn't supposed to be here, but there he was, striding to the back row like he owned the marble floor. He didn't glance at Jasmine. His eyes found Ivanka, and hers dropped for the first time. He sat, but it felt like he claimed the stage. The room's gravity shifted toward him. Jasmine didn't blink. Her hand rested lightly on the red folder, now alive with its own pulse. The chairwoman's voice cut through, sharp but unsteady. We now begin the hearing on the financial oversight of the Ivanka Trump Foundation. Miss Trump, your statement. Ivanka's voice floated out light as a feather, too light, the kind that disarms. Thank you, Madam Chair, she said, a soft smile playing. I'm here to clear up any concerns about my foundation's donations. Transparency will sort it all out. Jasmine tapped the folder once, a single knock on a door nobody wanted opened. Her eyes locked on Ivanka like a storm, zeroing in on a city skyline. That folder, still sealed, sat like a loaded pistol. What could it hold that made Ivanka sweat and Trump barge in uninvited? What happens when one document grabs a nation's attention? One woman, one truth, one moment to shift history. Ivanka's voice drifted through the chamber, smooth as velvet, every word polished by a team of legal eagles and spin doctors. The Ivanka Trump Foundation has always stood for kids' education, women's empowerment, and community health across America, she said, her smile steady as a rock. Any mix-up comes from misread records, fully compliant when you look at the big picture. Cameras clicked in rhythm. Her delivery was flawless, each phrase crafted to slip past scrutiny. Jasmine sat still. No notes, no whispers to aides, just a hawk's stare watching a dove, unaware it was bleeding out. Her hand stayed on the red folder, its weight bending the room's air. When Ivanka finished, she leaned back as if saying, I've done my part, let's move on. But Jasmine had other plans. She leaned forward, slow, deliberate like a prosecutor, sensing the jury's already half convinced. No small talk, no preamble. Miss Trump, she said, voice low and sharp as a blade, do you recall? Authorizing a $1.8 million transfer for an event called the Venice Gala in March 2022. Ivanka's smile flickered, a hairline crack in her composure. It was a fundraising event, yes, she replied, quick but careful. I believe it was postponed due to unforeseen issues. Jasmine's eyebrow arched. Postponed or canceled? Ivanka paused. I'd need to check the event team's records, but I recall a postponement. Jasmine cut in, voice flat as iron. No need. It was canceled publicly 2 weeks before the payment. Silence gripped the room like a vice. Someone's breath caught. Jasmine slid a press release from beneath the folder, not opening it yet. Exhibit A now on screen, she said, as the wall monitor flared with the document labeled in bold Exhibit A Foundation Press, released the 9th of March 2022. Your foundation's statement, due to scheduling conflicts, the Venice Gala is canceled and will not be rescheduled this fiscal year. Dated 12 days before the $1.8 million wire. Care to explain? Ivanka shifted in her seat. Jasmine pressed voice calm, but cutting like glass. If the event was canceled, no rescheduling planned, where did that money go? Ivanka opened her mouth, then closed it like a script had gone blank. The accounting team handled disbursements independently, she said. Slower now. Jasmine's eyes tightened. But you signed it. She tapped the folder, the sound echoing through the mic like a judge's gavel. Exhibit B, now on screen, she said as the monitor showed a transfer order. Exhibit B wire transfer authorization, the 21st of March 2022, with Ivanka's signature in sharp focus. Your signature personally approved. Ivanka blinked, lips parting, no sound. Jasmine leaned closer, no smile. So, where did the money go? The room froze. Every camera turned to the red folder, still closed, still deadly. What was inside that could dismantle an empire in seconds? One letter, one confession. Can a single page burn a legacy to the ground? Ivanka said nothing. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She glanced at the chairwoman, then her lawyer, desperate for rescue. None came. Silence thickened, suffocating. Jasmine slid the red envelope to the center of the desk, slow as a guillotine dropping. Its crimson hue bled against the pale wood like a warning carved in fire. The room shrank, cameras, zoomed reporters, froze mid-breath. On C-SPAN, the feed split four ways: Jasmine's face, Ivanka's the envelope, and Donald Trump rigid in the back, jaw clenched so tight, his cheek twitched. No one else in this room has seen what I'm about to read, Jasmine said, her voice steady but sharp as a blade. Exhibit C, now, on screen, she announced as the monitor lit up, with Exhibit C confidential letter authenticated. The sender worked 2 offices down from you, Miss Trump, for 6 years. Then he vanished. No press release, no goodbye, no pension. She peeled open the envelope. Ivanka swallowed hard. Jasmine unfolded the letter, each crease deliberate, as if time itself was waiting. Then she read aloud, "To whom it may concern, I can no longer bear the weight of what I've witnessed. The Ivanka Trump Foundation is not a charity. It's a laundering scheme funneling donor funds into Trump Organization real estate ventures." The chamber erupted. Gasps ricocheted like bullets. The chairwoman gripped her desk. A Republican aide fumbled, spilling water across the floor. On live television, Ivanka's face filled the screen, her blinks betraying her. Jasmine kept reading, voice unyielding. The Venice Gala was a fiction. We fabricated invoices to justify the transfer. Miss Trump approved the ledger under her father's orders. I speak now because silence makes me guilty. Trump lurched forward in his seat. Ivanka froze, shoulders, stiff mouth slightly open, caught in a lie with nowhere to hide. Jasmine set the letter down, precise. No theatrics, just truth laid bare under glaring lights. She looked at Ivanka, then the committee, then the cameras. There's a word for this, she said. And it's not misunderstanding, it's fraud. Silence fell heavy, final. The lights dimmed in, feeling not fact. What if this wasn't just Ivanka's plan, but a family blueprint honed over decades? What secret could be so devastating? It silenced a room and a nation. When a former president roars, who dares stand taller? One word sparked a firestorm. Could it burn down a dynasty? The room was a fault line cracked open by Jasmine's words. The letter tied Ivanka's charity to fraud with threads leading straight to her father. That alone should have been the explosion. But what came next was sharper, colder. Donald J. Trump stood up. The scrape of his chair against the marble floor sounded like a blade dragged across bone. Faces turned before the sound even ended. His voice followed, thick snarl dipped in disdain. "Sit down, girl." He didn't shout it like a man losing his temper. He threw it like a brick, like a command meant for someone lesser, someone small, someone he thought he could still control. It wasn't just the word. It was the tone, the familiarity, the assumption. Everything in the room froze. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz quieter. Aides stopped typing mid-keystroke. Senators leaned back in their chairs, eyes darting to the camera, feeds to each other, unsure whether to gasp or wait for someone else to speak. Behind the media barricade, a C-SPAN tech whispered to his colleague, "Did he just..." But Jasmine didn't blink. She turned her head slowly, deliberately toward him. Her eyes were not angry, not shocked. They were surgical focused, like someone aiming, not reacting. She didn't answer right away. She let the silence choke the moment first. Then, like thunder sliding through velvet, she said, "I'll sit when the truth gets tired of standing." A gasp rippled down the press bench. Someone audibly whispered, "Oh my God," while a Republican aide looked straight at the floor, frozen in place. Even Ivanka turned her face pale now, her hands gripping the table's edge. The temperature in the room had shifted again, but this time it didn't belong to Trump. Jasmine took a step forward. Her heels clicked like punctuation marks. Her voice rose not in volume but in presence. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. The fire was in her stillness. "You don't get to shrink me with that word," she said, her gaze still locked on Trump. "I've heard it whispered behind doors. I've heard it scream from porches. I've read it in case files where women who look like me never made it home. But today you said it in this chamber on national television with cameras rolling with the world watching." Trump's face reddened, his mouth tightened, but no sound came out. The committee chair raised her gavel, but Jasmine lifted a hand gently, never breaking eye contact. "No, Madam Chair, let it stay. Let the country hear it raw, just like we've heard it for decades. Let them know what power sounds like when it panics." Reporters scrambled to transcribe every syllable. TikTok feeds lit up. MSNBC cut into scheduled coverage. Twitter, already ablaze, began to melt. Jasmine turned back to her desk, her voice calmer, now quieter but sharper. "I wasn't elected to be quiet. I wasn't raised to be small, and I damn sure wasn't sent here to be told when to sit." She sat not because she was told to, but because she chose to. And when she did, the room didn't return to normal. It bent around her. What happens when a single word meant to silence sets the whole country on fire instead? A spreadsheet. An email. A truth undeniable. Can 3 exhibits topple an empire? The silence left behind by Jasmine's words still lingered in the room like smoke after a fire. Even seated, she held the air hostage. Her hands moved without haste, no rush, no nerves. She tapped twice on the tablet in front of her, then looked toward the projection screen on the far wall. The chamber lights dimmed by command and the screen lit up. What appeared first wasn't dramatic but devastating. A clean white spreadsheet, black text, 4 rows, 4 transactions, each labeled Venice Gala vendor disbursement, each dated after the gala had been officially canceled, each transferring precisely $45,000,000 to an LLC in Delaware. The header read Recipient ET Strategic Holdings, LLC. Committee members squinted. Viewers at home leaned closer, but Jasmine didn't pause. She tapped again. The screen zoomed in. Beneath the LLC name was the registered manager, Eric Theodore Trump. A low rustle swept through the chamber. Someone exhaled too loudly. A pen clattered onto the tile floor. Jasmine looked toward Ivanka, whose face had gone visibly rigid. Not terrified yet, but hollow, like she had just remembered something she was hoping everyone else had forgotten. Jasmine let the image burn for a beat, then turned back to the room. "So let me get this straight," she said, her voice smooth as glass over ice. "A gala that never happened paid nearly $2 million to a shell company managed by your brother." Ivanka opened her mouth, but no words came out. Jasmine tapped once more. Now came the email. A screenshot filled the screen. The subject line read, "Venice Wires." It was from a former foundation employee dated 5 days before the transaction. "Just call it a gala. No one checks these." The quote hit like a grenade. A reporter's hand flew to her mouth. One of the Republican congressmen shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The room wasn't shocked anymore. It was sick. Jasmine stood again, not for theatrics, but for clarity. "So, Miss Trump," she said slowly, "was that your strategy, fabricate an event shift? The funds tuck it under a charity label and hope the rest of us were too distracted, too poor, or too tired to read the fine print?" Ivanka cleared her throat, but still said nothing. Donald Trump leaned forward in the back row, elbows on knees, fists clenched tight. The cameras caught everything. Jasmine didn't wait for Ivanka's answer, because everyone watching already knew it. She stepped aside and let the numbers speak louder than any denial. "This isn't a clerical error. It's choreography, and it's been rehearsed before." She stared straight into the main lens of the camera, broadcasting live to 48 million homes. "You don't get to hide behind charity while using it to rob the very people it's meant to serve." The spreadsheet remained glowing behind her, cold, clear, and impossible to ignore. What kind of family calls it philanthropy? While secretly writing checks to themselves, the numbers were still glowing behind her. Black ink on white lies. But Jasmine wasn't done. Not even close. She took her seat again, calm, unshaken, like she'd planned every second down to the breath. She adjusted her mic, leaned slightly forward, and said quietly, "For the record, I'd like to enter one final exhibit into evidence audio file 17B. Then she pressed a button. At first, there was only static, faint, distant, like a wire being tapped from another room. The entire chamber leaned in collectively, unsure of what they were hearing. Then a voice cut through the white noise, smooth but unmistakably nervous. A woman's voice. "Ivanka Trump's." Dad said, "We'll lose everything if this gets out. Just sign it and we'll clean it up later." No reaction, just silence. Then boom. Donald Trump slammed his palm onto the wooden railing in front of him hard enough to make the microphones tremble. "That's a lie," he bellowed, voice cracking like thunder across the room. "She never said that." The committee chair didn't hesitate. "Mr. Trump, you are not recognized. You will remain silent or be removed." But he was already on his feet again, face flushed, jabbing a finger toward Jasmine, like he was pointing at a crime scene. "You doctored that. You people are. This is illegal." His voice pitched higher, wild and desperate. The kind of tone you hear right before a dam gives way. Jasmine didn't flinch. She remained seated, hands folded, expression carved in stone. "The voice is yours, Mr. Trump," she said evenly. "We authenticated the file using a third-party forensic team. Time-stamped, device ID, chain of custody, all documented from the moment the recording was secured by our investigative team to its presentation here, ensuring no tampering or alteration along the way." She tapped her tablet again. The full transcript appeared on screen. The words glowed like courtroom graffiti across the marble wall. Ivanka was frozen in place, face blank, but her hands trembled slightly enough for the camera to catch. She knew what was coming. Everyone did. Jasmine stood. She didn't raise her voice. She lowered it just enough to pull the room in tighter. "This wasn't an accident," she said. "It was a family decision." The press gallery erupted in murmurs. The emails were one thing, the spreadsheet damning, but this was intent. This was conspiracy caught on tape. Donald Trump stood like he might shout again, but this time he didn't. He just stood there, chest heaving, lips tight, like he knew what came next would be worse. Jasmine let the quiet settle. Then she turned to the committee and said, "The full audio file contains over 2 minutes of discussion. What I just played was the first sentence." Gasps rippled down the rows. Journalists scrambled. Phones lit up. America inhaled. She placed the tablet down slowly, like a final chess piece, then looked straight into the camera. "And if this is what they said in private, what else are they hiding on tape? What else did Jasmine find, and who else's voice might be on the next recording? A name from the past. A betrayal from within. Can one man's guilt unravel a family's secrets?" The last words of the recording still echoed in the room like smoke after a gunshot. No one moved. No one dared. Even the stenographer's fingers hovered above the keys, suspended midair. The committee chair sat, pale-faced eyes fixed on the screen. Ivanka stared straight ahead, no longer blinking, as if still hoping she might wake up and find this was all just a bad headline. Jasmine let the silence linger. She had learned something in her years as a litigator. Sometimes the truth lands harder when you don't rush it. She opened the red folder once more, not for effect, but for precision. Slowly, she pulled out a single page. One name, one signature, one line of ink that had the power to shake the whole foundation. She didn't raise her voice. The letter I read earlier was not anonymous. She held up the page for the room to see. Camera zoomed. The air got thinner. It was written and signed by Mr. Caleb Wexler. Gasps detonated across the chamber like small grenades. Someone in the back dropped a notebook. One of the reporters whispered, "No way." Loud enough for the mic to pick up. Caleb Wexler, a name that once trended on every political blog and media feed in 2020, the senior advisor, the golden boy Ivanka's shadow strategist. He was young, polished, and visible by design. Until one day, 6 months after the election, he vanished. No press release, no farewell tweet, no scandal. Just gone like someone erased him from the campaign story altogether. Jasmine let the name settle like dust across marble. She turned her eyes toward Ivanka. "You remember him, don't you?" she asked, calm, almost cold. Ivanka said nothing. Her fingers gripped the edge of her chair, knuckles white. Jasmine continued, her voice steady as a scalpel. Caleb was there the night the documents were altered. He was the one who drafted the language for the public misdirection memo. He sat at your right hand for 15 months, and when he asked questions, he was silenced. He told us as much in his letter. The screens lit up again. An image of Caleb Wexler appeared, screenshot from a past Fox Business interview. Clean-cut, sharp suit, the kind of face Americans are trained to trust. Underneath the headline read, Ivanka Trump's closest campaign architect. Ivanka didn't look up. Her silence was no longer poise. It was panic, dressed in pearls. Jasmine folded the page carefully, slid it back into the folder, and spoke with a surgeon's precision. He came forward not because he wanted revenge, but because he said the guilt was becoming unbearable. Donald Trump hadn't moved, but his jaw was locked. His daughter was unraveling. His name was on the next document. He knew it, and so did she. Jasmine stepped back, and for the first time since the hearing began, she smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the press, but for the truth finally clawing its way into daylight. What kind of secrets make a trusted insider disappear? And what did Caleb Wexler see that made him risk everything to speak? A voice from the right, a fracture in the ranks. Can one defection shatter the defense? The name Caleb Wexler was still hanging in the air like smoke from a slow-burning fire. His face on the screen, the former golden strategist now turned whistleblower, was a fracture point no one expected. On one side, Jasmine standing firm, armed with evidence and unshakable calm. On the other, Ivanka unraveling in real time, and in the middle, a room full of lawmakers suddenly realizing the ground beneath them was starting to crack. Then it happened. Not from the Democrats, not from the press bench, but from the last place anyone thought a rupture might come, from the right. A voice cleared from the Republican side of the committee. Calm, young, firm. Madam Chair, said Representative Mason Carr, freshman congressman from Ohio, 29 years old, conservative Trump, endorsed and until this moment silent. Heads turned so fast it was like someone had slapped the table. His mic blinked red. Even Jasmine tilted her head, slightly surprised. I believe we need to consider the evidence objectively, he said, hands folded, gaze direct. If Mr. Wexler, a man this administration once praised, is on record, under oath, with details that match financial documents and audio recordings, we can't dismiss that, not if we care about the integrity of this chamber. Gasps flickered like sparks. One aide to a senior Republican senator dropped his phone. Another covered his mouth. Ivanka turned to look at Mason Carr, her expression blank. No calculation this time, just disbelief. Jasmine didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The moment was doing the work for her. Within seconds, the alert banners rolled across screens in homes and offices across America. MSNBC breaking. GOP Congressman backs call for expanded Trump family inquiry. Fox News freshman Republican breaks ranks over Trump Foundation bombshell on Twitter. The clip was already viral. Mason Carr didn't grandstand. He didn't smile for the cameras. He simply leaned back in his seat and let the truth settle around him like ash after a quiet explosion. But the damage was done. For the first time, the story had broken containment. It wasn't a partisan attack anymore. It wasn't a Democrat stunt. It had crossed the aisle. And that was the one thing the Trump defense team hadn't prepared for: betrayal from within. Donald Trump leaned forward, red-faced, whispering something to one of his aides with visible fury. His lips moved fast, but the mics didn't catch it. The rage was there, though, even without sound. Ivanka didn't move. She simply lowered her eyes and placed her hand flat on the table like she was bracing for something far worse. Jasmine stayed quiet, but her expression had shifted just slightly. Not smug, not triumphant, just knowing, like a storm watching the tide change beneath it. What happens when the dam breaks from the inside and the party built to protect you starts walking away? The moment Representative Mason Carr broke ranks, something in the air shifted. The room didn't just tilt, it fractured. The Trump defense had been built on muscle memory, deny, deflect, dominate. But now the cracks were visible, spreading fast. And Jasmine Crockett hadn't even opened her last exhibit. As the room buzzed with the weight of Carr's words, Jasmine's mind drifted back for a moment, a backward bridge to the months of tireless work that led here. It started in her Texas office, drawing from her days as a public defender and civil rights attorney, where she learned to dig deep into cases others ignored. Subpoenas flew out for financial records, each one tracked with meticulous chain of custody logs to ensure every document remained untampered from seizure to this hearing. Late nights poring over tips from anonymous sources verifying whistleblower Caleb Wexler's letter through forensic handwriting analysis and sealed affidavits, all while building a bulletproof case that couldn't be dismissed as fake. Her background fighting for the overlooked in courtrooms fueled her. This wasn't just politics. It was justice she'd chased since law school. And now it all converged here. That was when Donald Trump lost control. He shot up from his seat like a volcano-breaking surface voice, thunderous and cracked. This is all fake lies, every damn bit of it. This is a political hit job. He didn't just shout. He roared as if volume alone could turn back time, bury evidence, or rewrite a signature. Committee members jumped. A Capitol police officer took a step forward. For a second, it wasn't clear if Trump would stop yelling or storm the dais himself. But Jasmine didn't move. She waited silent still as his rage spilled across the room like oil on fire. Then, without raising her voice, she leaned forward into the mic and said, "It's not politics, Mr. Trump." She held up a stapled document between her fingers. The pages flared white under the lights. "It's accounting." The room snapped back into silence. Jasmine stood and walked to the center screen. Her heels struck the marble like a countdown. "This," she said, unfolding the pages for the cameras, "is a federal IRS report, unpublished, obtained via subpoena. It outlines 5 misclassified transactions between the Ivanka Trump Foundation and ET Strategic Holdings, each flagged by a junior auditor in 2022. She tapped the page, and right here on line 87, Ms. Trump's signature approving a disbursement labeled as emergency disaster relief. She turned to the screen behind her. The signature appeared zoomed in high resolution, unmistakable, Ivanka's crisp, centered, timestamp verified. A ripple of gasps swept across the gallery. The IRS stamp shimmered in the corner like a quiet threat. Ivanka looked down at the table. Her hands were no longer shaking. They were just still, like she'd gone somewhere far away inside her own head. Trump stared at the screen, blinking furiously, then slammed his hand on the rail again. "She didn't sign that. She doesn't even do accounting. You planted that, all of you. This is illegal." The chairwoman raised her gavel, ready to call for security, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't even look his way. She kept her eyes on the document. "Then by all means," she said coldly, "have your legal team contact the IRS and accuse them of forgery. Let's see how that goes." You could hear a pin drop. Jasmine turned back to the committee, holding their report up one final time. When money moves in silence, signatures tell the story, and this one tells us everything. Cameras zoomed. Reporters typed like their fingers were on fire. Outside, the press pool went live with breaking banners already flashing. Trump sank slowly back into his seat, eyes hollow, rage smoldering under the weight of evidence. He could no longer shout away. If even the signatures are real, what's left to deny? The signature still glowed on the screen behind Jasmine. Undeniable, unshakable, inked in Ivanka Trump's own hand. It wasn't theory anymore. It wasn't speculation. It was a certified government document staring the entire country in the face. Jasmine had planted the final nail. Now all that remained was the silence that came after the truth lands like a hammer. A daughter's silence. A father's retreat. Can one refusal to speak change everything? Ivanka didn't speak, not to Jasmine, not to the committee, not even to her own lawyer. She just stared at the floor as if it might open up and swallow her whole. The room waited, cameras trained like rifles. A Democratic member leaned forward about to ask a follow-up question, but Ivanka raised her hand ever so slightly and turned to her attorney. In her mind, a fleeting thought flashed. How did it all twist like this? I only meant to do good, but the lines blurred too far. Her lips moved, barely a whisper, only one person heard. He leaned in, nodded slowly, then spoke into the mic with all the weight of a drowning man clinging to legal rope. "Madam Chair, on behalf of my client, we respectfully invoke the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination." Gasps rolled like thunder across the chamber. It wasn't just shocking, it was historic. A former first daughter refusing to speak under oath on live television in the face of irrefutable proof. The moment punched through screens across America like a gavel through glass. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't blink. She simply nodded as if she'd already counted on this exact outcome, because she had. Ivanka folded her hands. She didn't lift her eyes. The woman who once graced magazine covers and business panels now sat still as marble silence surrounded undone. Then, like clockwork, the storm broke. Donald Trump shot up again, but this time he didn't shout. He just stood there, jaw-clenched face, crimson fists balled so tight, the veins in his hands looked like they might burst. For a moment he stared at Ivanka, but she didn't look back. Not once. He turned and walked out. No warning, no statement, no goodbye. Just his back retreating down the marble aisle, as cameras followed his footsteps echoing like the tail end of an empire in freefall. Reporters surged. Capitol Police kept them back. The door swung open, and then he was gone. A Republican member whispered Jesus. One aide muttered, "Did that just happen?" But no one had to answer. The screen behind Jasmine still said everything. Ivanka Trump. Signature confirmed. Disbursement authorized. Silence flooded the chamber again, but this time it wasn't tense. It was final, like the sound that comes after a verdict is read. Jasmine stayed seated. Her expression never changed. Not triumph, not revenge, just clarity. Sometimes she said softly, voice picked up by every mic. Silence isn't protection. It's confession. And across the nation, millions of viewers sat stunned watching a family once untouchable come undone. By the one thing they never feared, paper ink, and the woman who dared to read it. The door slammed shut behind Donald Trump, but his exit didn't end. The hearing had ignited something far larger. A spark becomes a wildfire. Can one hearing rewrite America's story? Within minutes, the footage was clipped, subtitled, and broadcast on every screen across the country. Not just the red folder, not just the signature, but the silence. Ivanka's blank stare, the invocation of the fifth, the billionaire father walking out like a man who'd finally run out of rooms to hide in, and America was watching. In law schools from D.C. to California, professors paused lectures and wheeled in projectors. Lecture halls filled with students leaning over notebooks, jaws slack, some filming with shaking hands. At Harvard, a constitutional law professor whispered, "This moment will be studied for the next 50 years." At Spelman College, a young black woman stood and clapped when Jasmine uttered the line, "Silence isn't protection, it's confession." The room stood with her. In New York, it hit the streets. Within hours, signs appeared in Union Square, hand-painted in red, "Truth isn't polite." Others followed truth, stood up. "If you're quiet now, you're complicit." News helicopters hovered over a growing crowd as chants broke out, not of anger, but clarity. We saw it, we heard it, and we remember it. Across the country, retirees in Arizona texted grandkids. "Did you see that Jasmine woman in Detroit?" A former IRS agent called in live to a local radio station. "This isn't politics. She just read the audit out loud." And it stung. In Mississippi, a pastor paused mid-sermon to say, "When truth walks into a room and lies walk out, you've just seen God's justice." At Fox News, anchors looked rattled. Even the most seasoned faces couldn't spin silence into strength. A guest analyst whispered off camera before airtime, "We didn't think she had that much." They played the tape, but they couldn't control the emotion behind it. MSNBC, by contrast, played it on loop with a single word in bold, "Undone." A veteran reporter from the Washington Post watching from the gallery muttered to a colleague, "This is Watergate 2.0, but televised." Twitter melted. Jasmine Crockett trended globally. So did the folder Fifth Amendment fail, and the now viral hashtag Truth Isn't Polite. And in the middle of all this, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly in a back office beneath the hearing chamber, surrounded by aides who didn't speak. She didn't look at the screen. She didn't refresh her feed. She simply stared at a single copy of the IRS document, now marked Exhibit 19C, and said it was never about noise. It was about the echo. Because truth once spoken doesn't just land. It reverberates. It climbs. It multiplies. It finds its way through walls built by wealth and walls built by fear. And in this moment, this precise crack in history, Jasmine wasn't just the woman who stood. She was the sound that kept carrying long after others sat down. The room had become a tomb marble, cold and too quiet to feel real. Trump's exit was still reverberating, like a slammed door in the nation's psyche, and Ivanka's silence sat in the corner like a ghost everyone could see, but no one dared name. The committee chair called a recess, but no one moved with purpose. They moved like people who had just witnessed the inside of power crack open and spill something rotten. And yet amid the static, Jasmine stood. No theatrics, no raised chin, just a woman rising because it was time. Cameras turned in unison, microphones tilted toward her as if drawn by instinct. Even the gallery, packed with reporters who had already written tomorrow's headlines, froze. She walked slowly to the center mic, the one reserved for witnesses giving closing remarks. But this wasn't a closing, this was ignition. She didn't check notes. She didn't glance sideways. She didn't blink. Let's get one thing clear, she said, her voice like smoke over steel. This isn't about left or right. She paused, not for effect, but for gravity. This is about up and down. Who gets crushed and who gets covered? Who gets arrested for writing bad checks? And who builds an empire on lies with a smile and a signature? You could feel it in the back row, the shift. Like the room wasn't just listening, it was absorbing. Because I've seen what justice looks like when your name isn't famous. I've sat with mothers who lost their homes because the system moved faster than they could. I've watched kids get cuffed for stealing a sandwich while corporations launder millions through fake charity galas and get applauded for it. Behind her, the monitors still glowed with Ivanka's signature. Stamped, verified, inarguable. They call this political, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. But the truth has no party. It's not red, it's not blue, it's ink on paper. It's dollars you can trace. It's a microphone that doesn't lie even when powerful people do. One of the Republican members leaned back in his chair, lips pressed tight. On the Democrat side, no one moved. No smug smiles, no applause, just awe. Jasmine took a single step forward. This room wasn't built for people like me. It was built to make people like me feel small. But here's the thing. Truth doesn't care about architecture, and it doesn't whisper when it's tired of being buried. She let the silence hang. Let it breathe. Let it settle into every corner of the rotunda. The people who walk into this building with million-dollar last names think the rest of us will never speak loud enough to matter. But we are speaking, and we're not asking anymore. We're demanding. No one dared interrupt. I didn't come here to play politics. I came here to count every dollar, follow every lie, and carry every name, no matter how golden it sounds, to the same standard the rest of us live under. And then she ended it not with fury, not with applause, but with a line that would live far longer than the hearing. Truth doesn't care about your legacy, and neither do I. She turned, cameras chased her. Reporters surged forward, but Jasmine never looked back. Her walk was slow, certain, final. Like someone who didn't just win a battle, but burned down the blueprint. How much noise can the truth make when spoken by someone who was told to be silent? The hearing had ended, but the nation hadn't exhaled. It spread like static across living rooms, newsroom panels, late-night shows, and courtroom radio. You couldn't flip a channel, refresh a feed, or open a newspaper without seeing her name, Jasmine Crockett. Headlines screamed it. Pundits dissected it. Some tried to spin it. Most couldn't. By morning, her words had been translated into 5 languages. In Times Square, her closing line, "Truth doesn't care about your legacy, and neither do I," lit up on an LED billboard just beneath the NASDAQ ticker. On MSNBC, a panel of legal analysts leaned forward, nodding in a rare silence, as the audio clip of Ivanka Trump played again. On Fox News, confusion reigned. Even seasoned anchors didn't know whether to defend or pivot. The silence from Mar-a-Lago was louder than any press conference. But the loudest voice didn't come from cable news. It came from a cracked cell phone speaker on a local Chicago radio call-in show. "My name's Lorraine," the woman said, voice shaky, breath catching between words. "I'm a widow. My husband died in Afghanistan in 2011. We had 3 kids. I applied to the Ivanka Trump Foundation's disaster support grant when our house flooded in 2022. The host whispered, "Go on." "They told me we were shortlisted. Told me to wait. I never heard back. I kept waiting. I lost the house." She paused. "I kept telling myself, it's Ivanka. She's a mother. She'll help us." Another breath. "Then I was stupid." The line went quiet for several seconds. Then Lorraine broke the silence one last time. "She took my hope and turned it into a PR stunt. Jasmine gave it back to me in truth." The clip went viral within hours. By noon, Lorraine trended alongside Trump charity fraud and Crockett Strikes Back. Local stations from Georgia to Wisconsin began opening call lines just for victims of the foundation. A veteran from El Paso called to say he'd been promised mental health support that never arrived. A nurse in Cleveland had mailed in $500 from her stimulus check because Ivanka's website said it would go to frontline heroes. It didn't. On The View, Whoopi Goldberg held up the spreadsheet Jasmine had projected and said, "You don't need a degree in law, you just need eyes." This was theft. CNN brought in a former IRS investigator who confirmed the signatures were clean, unforgeable, and damning. The country wasn't just reacting, it was remembering. Suddenly, all the quiet stories, the silent losses, the buried scams, had a name to tie to a face, and a face to tie to a truth. And through it all, Jasmine said nothing. She wasn't on television. She wasn't tweeting. She wasn't celebrating. She was working, reviewing transcripts, preparing for the next hearing, and making sure every victim like Lorraine had their voice carried to the right page of the record. Because when the airwaves were full of noise, Jasmine Crockett was the one signal that cut through. How many promises were broken under the disguise of charity? And how many more voices were waiting to be heard? Courage has a price. What does it cost to challenge a dynasty? The applause wasn't universal. Not everyone cheered when Jasmine Crockett walked into history. Because for every headline that praised her courage, there was a whisper in the dark from someone who felt their empire trembling, and those whispers quickly turned into something darker. The first threat came less than 12 hours after the hearing. An envelope, no return address, postmarked from Florida, landed on her district office desk. Inside was a single typed sentence. "You've gone too far. Women like you don't live long in this game." No signature, no fingerprints, just venom folded in paper. Her chief of staff handed it over without a word. Jasmine read it once, then again, then tore it clean down the middle and dropped it into the shredder. Not because it didn't shake her, but because she refused to give it the dignity of space. But it didn't stop there. Messages poured into her inbox. Some violent anonymous calls, private numbers, emails, laced with threats of retribution. A former congressman even went on a conservative podcast and called her a reckless race baiter who thinks she's Harriet Tubman with a subpoena. The host laughed. His audience cheered. But louder than all of that were the letters. Stacks. Thousands from teachers, from nurses, from retired janitors, from people who had lost something and finally saw someone say their grief mattered. One from a fifth-grade class in Atlanta said, "Thank you for showing us that the truth can win." Another handwritten and shaky cursive read, "My son went to jail for a bounced check. Watching you hold that red folder, I cried for the first time in years." She read every single one. In between briefings and hallways, under the dim light of her office lamp at midnight, Jasmine read them. Because if her voice had cracked something open, these letters were proof the country was still listening. Then came the editorial. The Washington Post, in a Sunday piece that took up the full back page, titled it simply, "Crockett has redefined oversight." The article wasn't flowery, it was surgical. It said Jasmine didn't just question power, she dismantled its camouflage. That where others settled for headlines, she brought receipts. It compared her composure to Barbara Jordan, her clarity to Shirley Chisholm. But unlike the legends before her, Jasmine's battlefield wasn't a back room. It was a live stream, a screen, a nation's front row seat to accountability. The article ended with one line that echoed across Twitter, TikTok, and evening broadcasts. She didn't raise her voice, she raised the floor. And yet she walked to work the next day like it was any other Monday. No new security detail, no speech, just her in a leather briefcase, walking past news vans, past protesters, past history, like a woman who understood that truth doesn't travel with comfort, it travels with consequence. When a woman dares to speak against a dynasty, is it any surprise that echoes come with crosshairs? A DOJ seal, a family's fall. Can one investigation end an era? It came not with a bang, but with a press release. No podium, no primetime speech, just a white sheet of paper stamped with the seal of the United States Department of Justice, and 13 words that landed like a thunderclap across the American landscape. A full federal investigation into the Ivanka Trump Foundation is hereby open. By noon, the seal of the DOJ was on every screen in America. Headlines screamed it in all caps. DOJ opens criminal probe into Trump Family Foundation. Cable anchors tripped over themselves trying to keep up. Analysts dissected every sentence of the release, but none of them had to say what everyone already knew. Jasmine Crockett had done what no one else had managed in 7 years. She cracked the family armor. Reporters waited outside her office. Staffers whispered down congressional hallways. Fox News flailed for a counter-narrative, but nothing stuck. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't hold a press conference. She didn't take a victory lap. She didn't even tweet. Instead, when asked for comment by a flood of microphones outside her door, She paused, looked at the flashing lights, and said softly, "Don't thank me. Look at who had to pay the price before someone finally listened." She didn't blink, didn't smile, just turned and walked back inside. The reporter stood frozen, unsure what to ask next. Because what do you say to someone who just rewrote the rules of power and doesn't even want the credit? Meanwhile, the fallout spread like fire on dry brush. Former foundation staffers began lawyering up. Whistleblowers emerged from the shadows. A subpoena was issued to Eric Trump before sunset. Congressional Republicans held emergency meetings behind closed doors. And somewhere behind tinted glass and locked gates, Donald Trump reportedly hurled a phone into a marble fireplace. The media called it a reckoning, but Jasmine didn't use that word. To her, it was just math finally catching up to power, receipts finally outpacing, excuses the long shadow of justice finally standing tall enough to reach the front steps of wealth. That evening, she stood by her window alone in her office, watching the Capitol lights shimmer across the mall. Behind her, a manila folder rested on her desk, marked with a DOJ seal and stamped confidential. She didn't open it yet because Jasmine Crockett had learned that the biggest shift didn't come when the world shouted. It came in the stillness after when power realized it was no longer invisible. Outside, protesters carried candles and cardboard signs. The biggest one read "Justice, not branding." And across the Atlantic, international headlines lit up like echoes. BBC called it "America's Reckoning Televised." Le Monde wrote "La véritable Crockett Vando Dev." Even Al Jazeera aired a segment titled, "When Silence is Exposed, Can American Democracy Still Correct Itself?" The world wasn't just watching it, was answering inside, Jasmine whispered to no one. In particular, maybe not even aloud. Let the fire spread. Let it reach the parts they thought would never burn, because when a dynasty catches flame, it doesn't just scorch history. It dares the country to ask when legacy burns what rises from the ash justice. Or another lie. A call from the past, a legacy past. Can one conversation bridge generations? The Capitol was asleep, but the lights in Jasmine Crockett's office still glowed. Not harsh, not fluorescent, just soft enough to cast her shadow against the glass window that framed the city below. She stood barefoot on the cold floor heels, abandoned near the door blazer draped over the back of a chair, her shoulders finally allowed to drop. Outside, the dome of the Capitol shimmered like a memory made of marble. Inside, Jasmine didn't move, not yet. She stared out into the night, not looking for answers, just listening to the quiet, to the wait, to the moment when the shouting stopped, and all that remained was the truth, and what it had cost her to drag it into the light. Behind her, the red folder rested inside a locked drawer, sealed again, its work complete. But Jasmine knew better than anyone. Truth doesn't sleep just because the camera shut off. It lingers, it waits, and sometimes it haunts. She ran a hand through her curls and exhaled slowly, letting the silence settle into her bones. This wasn't the end of anything. If anything, it was the beginning of a storm no one had trained for. But for the first time in weeks, she had no lines to memorize, no files to cross-reference, just a memory. She thought back to where it started. Not this scandal, not this case, but the calling. A basement office in South Dallas peeling paint a printer that jammed every third page. She was fresh out of law school and drowning in student debt. But she had 2 chairs, a stapler, and a vow to take every case others ignored. She remembered the woman who came in crying, holding a crumpled eviction notice in one hand and her baby sock in the other. Jasmine didn't win that case, but she bought the woman one more week. And in that week, the woman found a new job, found a way to stay. Jasmine never forgot her name. There were nights too many to count when she stayed up till dawn writing motions by candlelight after the power was cut. There were judges who looked through her prosecutors, who laughed in the hallway, and yet she never stopped, because she had seen what injustice looked like up close. And it didn't wear horns or carry signs. It wore smiles, it shook hands, it signed checks. It sat behind desks made of mahogany and marble, and now she had cracked it open on live television. She looked back at the Capitol dome, glowing like a lie you can't quite unsee. And she whispered, not for the press, not for her team, just for herself. You said I was too loud, but you heard me anyway. Her phone buzzed across the desk. Another message, another alert, another interview request. She didn't check it. She turned away from the window, picked up the envelope that started it all, and slipped it into a safe under her desk. The combination turned with 3 smooth clicks, and then she stood still, hand resting on the steel door. Because Jasmine Crockett understood something most people miss, The moment you speak truth to power, you don't just make enemies, you inherit the silence they tried to bury you with. The phone lit up again. This time, Jasmine glanced at the screen expecting another reporter, another meeting request, another storm to manage. But it wasn't any of those. The name on the screen froze her breath. Anita Hill. "Hello," Jasmine answered softly. The voice replied, low, resolute, sacred. "You didn't just speak for yourself, Jasmine. You spoke for every woman who's ever been told to sit down." Jasmine leaned against the desk, her chest tightened not from fear, but from recognition. Anita continued, "I've watched every second. You stood in that room like it belonged to you, and now it does. No flattery, no performance, just one generation, seeing the next step forward." Jasmine didn't cry, but something inside her cracked open because this wasn't praise. It was a passing of the torch. Anita's final words were simple, immortal. "They tried to erase me. You rewrote the ending." Then the line went silent, and Jasmine stood taller than ever. Jasmine stayed frozen, phone still in hand, staring at the quiet hum of the city beyond the glass. And in that moment, she didn't feel alone. She felt surrounded not by staffers or allies, but by every woman who had ever been told to sit down, to be quiet, to stop making trouble. They were all still here, and now they had her voice. Jasmine placed the phone down gently like it was sacred. Outside, the Capitol dome still burned white in the night. But inside Jasmine Crockett's soul, there was a different kind of fire now. The kind you inherit when the woman who walked first tells you it's your turn to run. Stepping into the spotlight, a young girl's sign. Can one moment turn truth into a movement? When Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the Capitol, the night didn't greet her with peace. It erupted. Cameras blinked like sniper scopes. Reporters surged like a tide held back too long. Boom. Mix jutted forward like spears. The marble steps beneath her feet felt heavier now, like they had absorbed every word from the hearing and didn't quite know what to do with the weight. But Jasmine, she walked like she already knew the path. They shouted her name, dozens of voices folding over each other, questions stacking like dominoes. "Miss Crockett, what happens next? Did you expect the fallout? Do you think Ivanka should be indicted?" She paused halfway down the steps. A flash went off so bright it turned her silhouette to shadow. She didn't flinch. She smiled. Not the smile of victory, but something quieter, something earned. Then she said it, "I don't need the spotlight. I need justice." The words didn't echo. They landed. Heavy, sharp, final. The crowd went silent for a beat. Not because they were stunned, but because they understood she wasn't here to be a moment. She was here to be a movement. Behind her, the Capitol loomed like an old lion. Majestic, wounded, still dangerous. Inside, truth had just been dragged into daylight. Outside, it was learning how to walk. One reporter tried again. "Do you think the Trump family's legacy can survive this?" Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to, because survival isn't always a sign of innocence. Sometimes it's just a delay in consequence. She continued down the steps, heels clacking like punctuation marks to a sentence no one dared write until today. Her team followed behind, quiet, reverent. But Jasmine didn't look back. At the bottom of the stairs, a young girl stood behind the barricades, maybe 13, holding a handwritten sign on cardboard. "Truth has curls too." Jasmine saw it, stopped, and smiled again, this time wide or fuller. She walked over and touched the girl's hand through the barrier. No press captured it. No mic caught the words she whispered. But the girl nodded, eyes wide, with something far louder than applause. Hope. And then Jasmine Crockett turned to the street, not as a congresswoman, not even as the woman who exposed a dynasty's darkest fraud, but as someone who had once sat in a courtroom with no power, no press, no promise, and now stood with a nation watching. Because the path ahead wasn't paved in gold. It was lined with resistance, denial, and fear. But it was hers, and she would walk it with the same force she used to crack open silence. The fight might be over, but the war for truth never ends quietly. Headlines race. Frozen accounts. A resignation. Can one hearing bring down a dynasty? The headlines didn't wait for the ink to dry. Trump Foundation frozen. Ivanka resigns from all boards. Crockett's hearing shifts Washington landscape. The air in D.C. crackled not with celebration, but with recalibration. Offices that once whispered behind closed doors now sat in stunned silence, deleting old emails and rewriting public statements. In the shadow of one televised hearing, the empire of plausible deniability began to crack like a glacier underfoot. The Department of Justice moved swiftly quicker than expected. An emergency injunction froze every account tied to the Trump Foundation. From the gold-plated trusts in Delaware to the offshore shells in the Caymans, prosecutors cited overwhelming preliminary evidence of fraudulent intent, a phrase that hadn't been attached to a presidential family in over half a wide century. But the shock came not from the legal filing, it came from Ivanka. Without a word to her father, without a single tweet, she released a two-line statement at 6:02 a.m. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from all philanthropic boards and initiatives. I will be taking time to reflect with my family. There was no press conference, no apology, no spin, just silence. Cold, deliberate, strategic silence. And Washington heard it for what it was, a surrender draped in politeness. Jasmine read the news on her cracked iPad while riding alone in the back of a government sedan. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just stared as if waiting for the truth to stop, surprising her because she knew this wasn't justice. Not yet. This was just reaction, the flinch of power when it's finally caught without makeup. Outside protesters circled the federal courthouse. Some held signs, others held their children. But all of them young, old blue-collar black road looked toward the crumbling house of Trump with the same question in their eyes. What took so long? On Capitol Hill, the fallout spread fast. Lobbyists canceled lunch. Donors went quiet. Senate aides scrubbed their inboxes clean. And behind every marble wall, old alliances dissolved like sugar in gasoline. One Fox News anchor, once a staunch defender of the Trump brand, broke character mid-segment and whispered, "We may be watching the beginning of an American reckoning." The studio cut to commercial, and in a quiet corner office overlooking the P2 act, Jasmine Crockett stood before her window, unreadable. The war wasn't over, but a chapter had slammed shut. Not with applause, not with riots, with resignations, frozen accounts, shaken donors, and a nation wide awake asking how far the rot truly went. And Jasmine knew the final page was still unwritten. A stage, 1,000 students, a spark. Can one speech ignite a generation? The lights in the Howard University auditorium weren't just bright, they felt holy. Over 1,000 law students filled the rows dressed in tailored suits and nervous hope. Some held notebooks, others held their breath. All of them had one thing in common, and they weren't here to be comforted. They were here to be ignited. Jasmine Crockett stood at center stage, not behind a podium, but in front of it, closer to the edge, closer to them. The cameras were rolling, but she didn't perform. She didn't need to. Her presence alone had become a signal when she spoke. Something shifted. She looked out over the crowd like a judge surveying a jury that hadn't been born yet when the story began. Her voice, when it came, didn't rise, it landed. "If they fear your voice," she said, eyes scanning every face, "it's because it's doing the job." No one clapped. Not yet. It was the kind of sentence that needed a second to burn through skin before it reached bone. She didn't smile. She pressed forward. "You'll be told to wait your turn, to lower your tone, to play the game so you might one day change it. But I didn't come here to teach you patience. I came here to remind you that the system only moves when it's forced." Now the applause erupted, not polite but guttural, like a collective exhale held in for too many years. Jasmine waited, then softer. "When I stood in front of that committee, I wasn't thinking about politics. I was thinking about the women I couldn't save when I was a public defender. The single mothers who got scammed by charity promises. The kids who believed in fairy tales printed on red hats. I was thinking of the silence they were forced to swallow and how loud it needed to come out." A few students stood, others followed. She walked slowly across the stage, not pacing but claiming space. "Let me be clear, I didn't win. I revealed, and revealing hurts. It costs, but you cannot build a nation worth inheriting without first gutting the rot." By now the entire room was on its feet, but Jasmine's voice dropped to a hush, dragging every ear with it. "So when they call you angry," she paused, "remember that it's a tactic. When they call you dangerous, remember it's projection. And when they tell you to sit down, a smile slight sharp, ask them if they're scared of the view when you're standing." Thunder. That's what it sounded like. Thunder inside four walls. She didn't thank them. She didn't bow. She just raised one hand, not in farewell but in reminder. That truth doesn't whisper. It walks into the room uninvited, and in that moment it wore heels, a calm stare, and the name, Jasmine Crockett. One question, one answer. Can 4 words change the world? The press line outside the Howard Auditorium swelled like a tide after a storm. Reporters jostled for position cameras flashing like lightning strikes chasing a final quote. Jasmine Crockett descended the steps with steady grace, the late sun hitting her face like a spotlight pulled straight from justice itself. She didn't speak. She didn't rush. She let the silence stretch like velvet thick, undeniable earned. Then a voice cut through the noise. Sharp, young male, hopeful, maybe desperate. If you had to do it again, would you? Every microphone tilted toward her. The crowd behind her hushed. It wasn't a complicated question, but the weight of it hung like a gavel in the air. She stopped mid-step, pivoted, looked directly into the lens of a camera trained on her face, as if the country was staring back through it. No hesitation, just firing calm clothing. I do it louder. Not a word more, not a comma spared. The quote hit the ground like a thunderclap, and the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was stunned reverence. Even the reporters forgot to scribble for half a second. Because in that one line, Jasmine didn't just close a chapter. She carved it into stone. She turned and kept walking heels, clicking like a metronome, counting down to whatever would come next. Her team trailed behind quiet. They knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't even vindication. It was the breath before the next blow, the final shot before the next storm. Inside newsrooms across America, editors typed it up before the clip had even aired on Twitter. The line was already trending before she reached the black car waiting at the curb. I do it louder, not as defiance, but as warning. She didn't wave. She didn't look back because the woman who had once been told to sit down, girl, had now become the voice that even power couldn't drown. And she knew that somewhere in a boardroom or a bunker or a kitchen in middle America, someone was watching this moment and realizing the world had just shifted an inch. And inches, when justice is involved, can move mountains. She didn't rewrite history. She made it flinch. She stood where power had always silenced and power blinked first. Sometimes all it takes is one brave sentence to make power flinch. When Jasmine Crockett said, I do it louder, it wasn't defiance. It was a reminder that truth doesn't wait for permission. For those who were once told to sit down, especially in a season of life where many feel overlooked, your voice still carries the weight to shift history. If injustice stood before you today, would you whisper or would you speak louder for those who can't anymore? Leave a comment, share your voice, because silence never changed anything, but you still can. If this story stirred something in you, don't just scroll past it. Like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Truth Stories, where one voice can shake the powerful. And silence is never the end. Tap the bell because the next story won't just expose the truth. It might ask you to stand with it. What part made you stop and feel something? Leave a comment. Speak up. Because remembering together is how justice begins. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. Truth doesn't fade. It waits in the quiet until someone brave enough brings it back to light. Media frenzy, classrooms buzzing, justice echoing. Can one hearing become a lasting legacy? In the weeks that followed, the hearing didn't fade. It rewrote the narrative. Media outlets dissected every moment from the red envelope's reveal to Ivanka's silence, turning it into case studies for journalism schools. Professors at Columbia and Northwestern assigned essays on how Crockett's composure dismantled power, calling it a masterclass in accountability. Textbooks began including chapters on the event, labeling it a turning point in congressional oversight, where evidence and eloquence triumphed over denial. Legal scholars debated the implications for charity laws, with reforms proposed to prevent similar abuses inspired by the exposed laundering schemes. Public trust in institutions inched up as everyday Americans saw justice wasn't just for the powerful. Jasmine, now a symbol, received honors from civil rights groups. Her story taught in high schools as an example of speaking truth to power. The rewrite wasn't just headlines. It was a legacy etched in education law, and the collective memory proving one voice could echo through generations. What does it mean when a single day reshapes tomorrow?